The wind in Blackwood Creek did not simply blow, it scoured. It carried the grit of 3 counties, a relentless, abrasive breath that stripped the paint from the false-fronted buildings and worked its way into the seams of every coat and the creases of every face. The town sat huddled against the vastness of the territory. A collection of sun-bleached timber and adobe bricks dropped onto the high plains like an afterthought. There was a crooked church with a bell that rang flat, a livery stable that smelled of wet hay and manure, and a saloon that exhaled the scent of stale whiskey and tobacco smoke into the street from noon until dawn. Beyond the last roof, the land rolled away toward a line of low, dry hills that looked like the spine of some buried, ancient beast. It was onto this stage, under a white-hot sun that bleached the color from the sky, that the overland stagecoach delivered Anna Vance. The driver did not offer a hand to help her down. He merely tossed her small carpetbag into the dust, where it landed with a heavy thud, and spat a stream of brown tobacco juice near the wheel. Anna stepped down, her boots sinking slightly into the powder-dry earth. She stood perfectly still for a moment, the heat pressing down on her shoulders like a physical weight. She wore a gray dress that had been mended at the hem and a bonnet that shadowed her face, but nothing could hide the stiff, defensive posture of her spine. On her left hand, she wore a gold wedding band. The metal was worn thin, dull from years of worry, but to Anna, it felt heavy enough to drag her arm down. She did not look at it. She kept her hands clasped in front of her, gripping the handle of her bag until her knuckles turned the color of old ivory. The town was quiet, but it was the quiet of a predator holding its breath. Men sat on the porch of the general store, their chairs tilted back against the peeling wood. A woman shook a rug out of an upper window. As the stagecoach rattled away, leaving a hanging cloud of dust in its wake, the silence broke. It started with a murmur, a low vibration of voices passing judgment. Whispers moved faster than the wind here. Some of the eyes watching her held the spark of recognition, or perhaps just the assumption of it. They said she had come from Abilene, or maybe Dodge. They said she had worked in a parlor house, selling smiles and softness by the hour. Others, the ones with harder eyes, whispered that her husband was dead and that the law had asked too many questions about how it happened. Anna kept her eyes on the horizon, refusing to meet the gaze of the town. She felt the stares like insects crawling on her skin. She knew what they saw: a woman alone, with no kin and no coin, standing in the dirt. In the West, a woman without protection was considered public property, a thing to be discussed, assessed, and claimed. The bat-wing doors of the saloon pushed open, and a man stepped out. He was broad, with a mustache waxed into sharp points and a waistcoat that strained against his midsection. This was Silas, the keeper of the only establishment in town that sold comfort. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked Anna up and down, his gaze lingering on the curve of her waist and the desperate set of her jaw. "You look lost, miss," Silas called out. His voice was oily, carrying easily across the quiet street. Anna did not turn her head. "I am waiting for the store to open." Silas stepped off the boardwalk, his boots crunching in the dirt. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could smell the pomade in his hair and the sourness of his sweat. "The store is open, but they do not sell what you need. You have the look of a woman who needs a warm bed and a hot meal. I have rooms upstairs, clean sheets, and work for a woman who is not afraid to be friendly." The implication hung in the hot air. Naked and ugly. Anna tightened her grip on her bag. Her stomach twisted, a cold knot of nausea that had nothing to do with the heat. "I am not looking for that kind of work, sir." "Everyone needs to eat," Silas said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "And out here, pride is a luxury that costs more than you have in that bag." She took a step back, putting distance between them. "I said no." At the far end of the street, a rider appeared, cutting a silhouette against the blinding glare of the sun. The horse was a big bay mare, weary and coated in a layer of trail dust that turned her coat the color of sandstone. The man in the saddle looked much the same. Eli Thorne rode with the slump of a man who had been in the saddle since before dawn, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the street from beneath the brim of a battered hat. Eli was a man made of hard angles. His face was weathered by 40 years of sun and wind, etched with lines that spoke of squinting against the glare and gritting teeth against the cold. He wore a canvas coat despite the heat, and a gun belt hung low on his hips, the leather worn smooth. He had not come to town for trouble. He had come for flour, coffee, and to see if the banker would grant him another month of grace. He pulled the mare up at the hitching rail in front of the general store, sliding from the saddle with a stiffness that betrayed the ache in his lower back. The winter had been brutal, the kind of winter that killed cattle where they stood and froze men in their beds. He had lost nearly half his herd. He was tired, bone-deep tired, and his patience was frayed like the end of an old rope. As he tied the reins, he heard the voices. He looked over his shoulder and saw the woman standing in the street. She looked small, fragile, like a paper doll that the wind might tear apart. Silas was leaning toward her, and on the porch of the store, 3 ranch hands were passing a bottle between them, laughing. One of the hands, a man named Jeb, who was known for a mean streak when the whiskey took hold, stood up. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and stumbled down the steps. "Silas, leave the lady be." Jeb slurred, grinning. "She doesn't want your watered-down whiskey. Maybe she wants a real man." Anna shrank back, her eyes darting between Silas and Jeb. She looked like a trapped animal, searching for a gap in the fence that did not exist. Jeb reached out, his hand closing around Anna's wrist. "Come on now, darling. Let's see a smile." Anna flinched violently, a gasp tearing from her throat. She tried to yank her arm back, but Jeb held fast, laughing as he pulled her off balance. "Feisty one, ain't she?" Eli did not run, but he moved with a sudden, terrifying purpose. He stepped away from his horse, his boots striking the hard earth with a heavy, rhythmic cadence. He did not shout. He did not draw the pistol at his hip. He simply walked into the space between the men and the woman. He reached out and took hold of Jeb's forearm. Eli's hand was scarred, the knuckles swollen from years of breaking horses and building fences, but his grip was iron. He squeezed, digging his thumb into the tendon. "Let her go," Eli said. His voice was low, a rumble of thunder that promised a storm. It was not a request. Jeb yelped, his fingers springing open as the pain shot up his arm. He stumbled back, clutching his wrist, his face flushing red with humiliation and anger. "I was just having fun. Thorne, no need to get your back up." "Fun is one thing," Eli said, his eyes cold and flat. "Touching without permission is another. Get back on the porch, Jeb, before I lose my temper." Jeb looked at Eli, then at the gun on Eli's hip, and finally at the hard set of Eli's jaw. The alcohol fog cleared enough for him to recognize danger. He muttered a curse and retreated to the safety of the stairs. Eli turned to Anna. He expected gratitude, or perhaps relief. Instead, she scrambled backward, putting 6 feet of dusty street between them. Her chest was heaving, her face pale beneath the sunburn. When he shifted his weight, she flinched again, her hands coming up defensively as if she expected him to strike her. Eli stopped. He saw the terror in her eyes, not the startled fear of a woman harassed by a drunk, but the deep, entrenched terror of a woman who knew exactly what men were capable of. It was a look he had seen in horses that had been whipped until their spirit broke. "I am not going to touch you," Eli said, keeping his hands visible, away from his weapon. Anna stared at him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She saw a tall man, covered in dust, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was dangerous. She could see it in the way he stood, the way the other men had backed down, but he was not moving toward her. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, a jerky, mechanical motion. She could not speak. Her throat felt closed tight. The door of the general store opened, and the shopkeeper, Mr. Higgins, stepped out, wiping his spectacles. He looked at the scene with disdain. his gaze sliding over Anna with no more sympathy than he would show a stray dog. "Thorne," Higgins said, "if you are done brawling in the street, come inside. I have customers waiting." He looked at Anna. "And you, unless you are buying, don't block the road. Though I heard you are looking for some place to work and sleep." His tone made the words sound like an accusation. Anna swallowed hard, finding her voice. It was thin and raspy. "I am looking for honest work," Higgins snorted. "Honest work is hard to come by for a woman alone. Most end up at Silas's place eventually." Eli looked at the woman again. She was trembling, fine tremors running through her hands. He looked at the store, then back to his horse. He thought of the ranch. The empty house, the dust collects on the furniture, the meals he was too tired to cook, eating cold beans from a can while standing up. He thought of the laundry piling up, the garden that had withered because he was too busy riding the fence line. He was one man trying to do the work of three, and he was failing. He looked at Anna's hands. They were not soft hands. They were red and chapped. She knew work. "Can you cook?" Eli asked abruptly. Anna blinked, startled by the question. "What?" "Cook," Eli repeated. "Clean, mend clothes, keep a house from falling down around a man's ears." Yes," she said. "I can do those things." "I have a place," Eli said, feeling the eyes of the town on him. He knew what they would say. He knew the rumors that would start before the sun went down. He did not care. "It is 20 miles out, cattle ranch. I am on my own out there, and I can't run the herd and the house both. I can't pay much until the beef is sold in the autumn, but I can offer a roof, food, and a fair wage when I have it." Anna looked at him. She looked at the saloon where Silas was still watching. She looked at the empty, unforgiving street. The choice was stark. Starve, sell herself, or go with this stranger to a place where no one could hear her scream. She studied Eli Thorne. She looked at his neck, burned red by the sun. She looked at his boots, worn down at the heels. She looked at his eyes. They were gray, the color of a winter sky. They were tired eyes, lonely eyes, but they were not cruel. He did not look at her body. He looked at her face. He waited, giving her the space she needed. "I have conditions," she said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. Higgins laughed from the porch. "Conditions? You are a beggar, woman." Eli ignored the shopkeeper. "Name them." "I sleep in a separate room," Anna said, her voice shaking but her chin lifted. "With a lock, if there is one. You do not touch me, ever, and if I want to leave, you bring me back to town. No questions asked." The men on the porch snickered. Eli did not smile. He understood. He saw the ghost of violence that stood behind her shoulder. "There is a back room," Eli said solemnly. "It has a door. I will put a bolt on it tonight. I keep my hands to myself. And you are free to go whenever you choose. You have my word." Anna searched his face for a lie. She found only exhaustion and a strange, stoic patience. She took a deep breath, the hot air searing her lungs. "All right," she said. "I will go." Eli nodded once. He turned to his horse, untied the saddlebags, and tossed them over his shoulder. "I have to get supplies. Wait here. Don't talk to Silas." 20 minutes later, they were riding out of Blackwood Creek. Eli had rented a buckboard wagon from the livery to haul the supplies: flour, beans, coffee, barbed wire, and ammunition. Anna sat on the bench seat beside him, clutching her carpetbag on her lap. She sat as far to the edge as she could without falling off, leaving a foot of empty space between them. The silence between them was heavy, but it was not empty. It was filled with the creak of the leather harness, the jingle of the bit, and the rhythmic thud of the horses' hooves. They left the town behind, and the land opened up, swallowing them whole. It was a landscape of brutal beauty. The grass was short and brittle, singing a dry hiss as the wind moved through it. Gullies cut deep scars into the earth, carved by the violent flash floods that came with the spring rains. To the west, great towers of clouds were building, dark purple bruises against the blue sky. They promised rain, but in this country, rain often came with hail and wind that could strip the flesh from a man's bones. Anna watched the emptiness. It frightened her. There was nowhere to hide out here. If something happened, there was no sheriff, no neighbor, no church, but there was also a strange peace in the desolation. The vastness made her feel small, insignificant. Her past, her shame, her fear, they seemed smaller too, dwarfed by the endless horizon. Eli did not speak. He drove with an easy competence. His hands relaxed on the reins. He did not look at her, and for that, she was grateful. He seemed content to let the silence stretch, asking for nothing, offering nothing but the ride. It took 4 hours to reach the ranch. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and blood red. When Eli turned the team off the main track and under a wooden archway, the crossbeam was weathered gray, and a brand was burned into the wood. A T inside a circle. Anna looked at her new home, and her heart sank. The ranch was dying. She could see it in the way the fence posts leaned drunkenly, the wire sagging between them. The barn was a cavernous structure of dark wood, but the roof on one side had collapsed inward, leaving jagged timbers pointing at the sky like broken ribs. Weeds grew tall around the water trough, which was half empty and coated with green scum. The cabin itself was small, built of rough-hewn logs and chinked with mud. It had a front porch that sagged on the left side. No smoke rose from the chimney. It looked abandoned, a shell of a place holding on against the wind by sheer stubbornness. "It needs work," Eli said, his voice sounding loud in the quiet. He pulled the wagon to a halt in front of the house. "Winter was hard. I haven't had time for much else but the cattle." Anna looked at the house, then at the man. He looked ashamed. She saw the way his jaw tightened, the way he looked at the broken barn and then away. He was a man whose pride was crumbling along with his roof. "It is standing," Anna said quietly. "That is enough." They unloaded the wagon in the fading light. The inside of the cabin was dim and smelled of wood smoke and neglect. There was a main room with a cast-iron stove, a scarred wooden table, and 2 mismatched chairs. Dust lay thick on every surface. In the corner, a pile of muddy boots lay in a heap. The ceiling was stained black from soot. Eli pointed to a door at the back of the cabin. "That's the room. It was my brother's room. Before," he did not elaborate. Anna did not ask. She walked to the door and pushed it open. The room was tiny, just big enough for a narrow iron bed frame and a small washstand. The mattress was thin, ticking filled with straw. There was a single window, the glass wavy and thick with grime. She turned to look at the door. There was no lock. She looked at Eli. He was standing in the main room, holding a heavy metal slide bolt and a screwdriver he had taken from a drawer. "I told you I would put a bolt on it," he said. He walked past her, smelling of sweat and dust, and knelt by the doorframe. She watched him work, her body tense. He drove the screws into the wood with strong, sure turns of his wrist. When he was finished, he stood up and tested the bolt. It slid home with a solid clack. "It locks from the inside," he said. "You are the only one who can open it." He stepped back, giving her the doorway. "There is wood behind the stove, water in the bucket. I have to see to the horses." He turned and walked out of the cabin, closing the main door behind him. Anna stood alone in the gathering dark. She went into the small room and closed the door. She slid the bolt across. Clack. The sound echoed in the small space. She sat down on the edge of the narrow bed. The straw mattress rustled beneath her. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the gaps in the logs. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely, yipping sound that made the hair on her arms stand up. Anna Vance took off her bonnet and placed it on the washstand. She looked at the wedding band on her finger, twisting it round and round. She was 20 miles from the nearest town. She was in the house of a stranger, a man with scarred hands and a gun on his hip. She had traded the judgment of the town for the isolation of the wild. She lay down on the bed, fully clothed, pulling her knees up to her chest. Her eyes stayed open, staring at the dark ceiling. Every creak of the settling house sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind sounded like a hand trying the latch. She wondered if she had found sanctuary, or if she had simply walked into a different kind of prison. She listened to the silence, waiting for the sound of boots, waiting for the handle to turn, waiting for the violence she had learned to expect from the world. But there was only the wind and the beat of her own terrified heart. Dawn came to the high plains not as a gentle awakening, but as a breach, a gray light spilling over the eastern ridge to reveal the stark, unyielding vastness of the territory. For Anna, the morning began long before the sun crested the horizon. She rose in the dark, the air in the small back room cold enough to stiffen her fingers. She dressed quickly, shivering as she buttoned her high-collared dress, her ears straining for any sound from the main room. Routine was a fortress she built stone by stone. She would emerge from her room only after she heard the front door open and close, signaling that Eli had gone to the barn to tend the horses. Then, and only then, would she step into the main cabin to start the fire. The cast-iron stove was a temperamental beast, a mass of black metal that seemed to resent being woken. Anna's hands, once accustomed to the delicate work of embroidery and turning the pages of hymnals, were clumsy here. She broke fingernails on stove wood and burned her knuckles on the iron door. The flour bin was heavy, the water bucket heavier, and the coffee pot was a battered tin vessel that she scrubbed endlessly with sand, trying to scour away years of bachelor neglect. By the time the sun was fully up, Eli would return. He brought with him the smell of the earth, sharp sage, horse sweat, and the metallic tang of the cold morning air. He ate standing up more often than not, devouring the biscuits and salt pork she prepared with a grim efficiency. He spoke little. He would nod a thanks for the coffee, his eyes scanning the horizon through the window rather than looking at her. And then he would be gone again. His absence left a hollow ringing in the cabin. Eli spent his days riding the fence lines, searching for cattle lost in the ravines, or repairing the damage the winter had wrought. Anna was left alone with the wind. It was a constant companion, rattling the window panes and whistling through the chinking in the logs. She spent those long, silent hours waging a war against the dust. It was an impossible enemy. She swept the rough plank floor until her back ached. But an hour later, a thin film of grit would return. She took Eli's shirts, stiff with dried sweat and mud, and scrubbed them in a tub of boiling water until her hands were raw and red. She mended the tears in his coats, her needle flashing in the dim light, stitching together fabric that was wearing thin, much like the man who wore it. Yet, in this harsh silence, small things began to shift. It started with the boots. For the first week, the heavy thud of Eli's boots on the floorboards at night made Anna startle, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sound was too heavy, too reminiscent of another man's angry stride. Then, one evening, she heard him stop on the porch. There was a scuffling sound, followed by the soft pad of stocking feet entering the cabin. He had left his boots outside. He never said a word about it, but the cabin was quieter that night, and Anna breathed a little easier. Another day. The leather hinge on her bedroom door snapped, leaving the door hanging crookedly. Panic flared in her chest. Without that door, she had no sanctuary. She did not ask him to fix it, terrified to be a burden. But when she returned from the creek with a bucket of water, she found the hinge replaced with a sturdy strip of new rawhide, oiled and nailed securely into place. Despite these silent gestures, Anna remained hypervigilant. Her body was a wound that had not yet healed, and her instincts were wired for survival. If Eli passed too close to her in the narrow kitchen, her shoulders would hunch up toward her ears. If his shadow fell across her while she was washing dishes, she would drop the rag and step sideways, putting the table or a chair between them. The test came on a Tuesday morning. 2 weeks into her stay, Anna was distracted. The wind was howling particularly loud, and the stove was drawing poorly, filling the kitchen with the wisps of acrid smoke. She had placed a pan of biscuits in the oven and turned to scrub a pot, lost in the rhythm of the work. She missed the smell of scorching flour until it was too late. Smoke billowed from the oven door. Anna gasped. Grabbing a cloth to yank the pan out, the biscuits were black, ruined lumps of charcoal. At that exact moment, the front door opened. Eli walked in, dusting his hat against his leg. He stopped, sniffing the air. Anna froze. The pan shook in her hands. The old terror washed over her, cold and absolute. In her mind, she was back in the parsonage, the smell of burnt dinner filling the air, hearing the heavy footsteps of her husband coming down the hall, knowing that incompetence was a sin that would be punished with a closed fist or a belt. She shrank back against the counter, her eyes wide, waiting for the shout, waiting for the blow. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling so hard the words were barely audible. I will make more. I am sorry." Eli looked at the smoking biscuits. He looked at Anna, pressed against the wall as if she expected him to draw a knife. He paused, his expression unreadable. Then he shrugged. He walked over, picked up one of the blackened biscuits, broke it open to find the small scrap of edible dough in the center, and popped it into his mouth. "No man ever died from a burnt biscuit," Eli said, his voice flat and calm. "Not out here, anyway. Better burnt than raw." He poured himself a cup of coffee and walked out to the porch to drink it, leaving her standing there, clutching the pan, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against a threat that had not materialized. That evening, dinner was simple, a stew of beans and salt pork, but it was not burnt. They sat at the small table, the oil lamp casting a pool of yellow light between them. The shadows in the corners of the room were deep, but the silence felt less jagged. "The fence in the north pasture is down," Eli said, breaking the quiet. It was the first time he had offered conversation beyond necessity. "Elk, likely, or just rot." Anna kept her eyes on her plate. "Can it be fixed?" "I can patch it, but I need wire." He paused, pushing a bean around his plate with a piece of bread. "I lost a lot of fence in the blizzard, same time I lost the herd." Anna looked up. Was the winter bad? Eli let out a short, humorless laugh. "Bad? It was a killing frost. Lasted 3 weeks without a break." "The cattle, they just froze standing up. Found them come spring, huddled in the draws." He stopped, his jaw working as he chewed. "My brother, Samuel, he went out in the second week. Thought he could bring the strays in from the ridge." The name hung in the air. Samuel, the brother who had slept in the room where she now hid. "He was young," Eli said softly, his eyes unfocused. 22. I told him to go. I said the herd was worth more than the risk. I was wrong." "You could not have known," Anna said. "I am the older brother." Eli replied, the guilt etched into the deep lines around his mouth. "It is my job to know." He fell silent, but the door had been cracked open. Over the next few nights, more pieces of his life fell onto the table like crumbs. She learned that the ranch was not just a home, it was a legacy he was failing to keep. The bank in town held a note on the land, and with the herd decimated, Eli was months behind on the payments. The land was his pride, the only thing he had to show for 40 years of life. But it was also a trap, binding him to a debt he could not pay and memories he could not escape. Anna listened, offering quiet nods. She understood traps. She understood what it was to be bound to a place that hurt you. But while the days grew easier, the nights became a battlefield. The nightmares arrived without warning. Anna would wake in the pitch black of her room, her lungs seizing, her mouth open in a silent scream. The dream was always the same. The click of a lock turning from the outside, the heavy, deliberate footsteps of her husband, the Reverend Vance, the smell of old hymnals and stale sweat, his voice, booming and righteous, quoting scripture, "Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands, as unto the Lord," while his hands did things that had nothing to do with God. She would wake gasping, clawing at her throat, tears streaming down her face into her hair. One night, the dream was so vivid she cried out, a sharp, broken sound that pierced the thin walls of the cabin. In the main room, Eli woke instantly. He sat up on his bedroll, his hand instinctively going to the Colt Navy revolver he kept by his head. Then he realized the sound came from the back room. He heard the sobbing, muffled, desperate sounds of a woman trying to swallow her own grief. He stood up and walked to her door. He raised his hand to knock, to offer comfort, to ask if she was safe. But his hand hovered inches from the wood. He remembered how she flinched when he walked near her. He remembered the way she held herself, tight and small. If he opened that door, if he invaded her dark sanctuary, he would only be another man looming in the shadows. He lowered his hand. He leaned his forehead against the rough wood of the doorframe, listening to her weep. He felt a profound, aching helplessness. He could rope a steer. He could shoot a rattlesnake at 30 paces, but he could not fight the ghosts in that room. So he stood there, a silent sentry in the dark, waiting until her breathing slowed and the sobbing ceased, before he returned to his solitary bed. By the end of the month, the pantry shelves were bare, the flour sack was empty, and the coffee tin held only dust. "I have to go to town tomorrow," Eli announced one evening. "Supply run." Anna looked up from her mending. The thought of being left alone on the ranch for a full day and night terrified her. The silence, which she tolerated when he was near, became a roaring monster when he was gone. And the men. What if someone came? What if Caro, or men like the ranch hand Jeb, decided to ride out? "I will go with you," she said. Eli frowned. "Anna, town, people talk. You know what they say." "I know," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. "But I will not stay here alone. Not yet." Eli studied her face, seeing the fear she tried to hide. He nodded slowly. "All right, we leave at dawn." The ride to Blackwood Creek was tense. As the town came into view, Anna felt her skin prickle. When the wagon rolled onto the main street, the atmosphere shifted. It was not just curiosity now. It was open hostility. They tied the horses in front of the general store. As Anna climbed down, she felt the stares. 2 women in bonnets, standing outside the milliner's shop, stopped talking abruptly. One of them pulled her young daughter close, pressing the child's face into her skirts as if Anna carried a contagious disease. "Shameless," one of the women hissed, loud enough to be heard. "Living in sin with that man. Once ruined, always ruined," a man on the boardwalk muttered to his companion, spitting tobacco juice near Anna's boot. Anna kept her head down, her face burning. She focused on the wooden planks of the sidewalk. "Walk," she told herself. "Just walk." They entered the bank first. Eli needed to speak about the note. The interior was cool and smelled of ink and polished wood, a sharp contrast to the dust outside. Mr. Caro, the banker, sat behind a large mahogany desk. He was a man who looked too clean for the frontier. His suit was black wool, immaculate, and his hands were soft, with manicured fingernails. He did not stand when they entered. "Mr. Thorne," Caro said, his voice smooth like oil on water. "And company?" His eyes slid to Anna. It was a cold, reptilian gaze. There was no lust in it, only a calculating recognition. "I brought the payment for the interest," Eli said, placing a small leather pouch on the desk. "It is all I have until the autumn sale." Caro nudged the pouch with a pen, as if it were distasteful. "The interest is well and good, Eli, but the principal is due. The investors in St. Louis are growing impatient. They hear rumors that your operation is distracted." Caro looked at Anna again, a smile curling the corner of his mouth. "I know you, don't I? Mrs. Vance, from Abilene." Anna went pale. Her fingers gripped the fabric of her skirt so hard her knuckles turned white. Abilene was where the worst of it had happened, where the rumors had started, where the law had looked the other way. "I heard your husband passed," Caro said, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "A tragedy, though some say the tragedy was that he married a woman with such a colorful history before him." "We are here to pay the debt, Caro," Eli said, his voice dropping an octave. He stepped slightly in front of Anna, blocking Caro's view. "Not to gossip." "It is all related, isn't it?" Caro leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Character matters in business." "Eli, A man who harbors a woman of ill repute, well, the bank considers that a risk. Moral decay leads to financial decay. He stood up then, walking around the desk. He stopped a few feet from them. I will take interest, but know this, I want the full amount by the first frost, or I take the land. And as for you, Mrs. Vance. He looked at her with a sneer. Be careful. This town has laws against vagrancy and indecency. I would hate to see the sheriff involved. Anna felt the blood drain from her face. It was a threat, clear and sharp. He knew. And he would use it. Eli took Anna's elbow, his grip firm but protective. We are leaving. They walked out of the bank into the blinding sun, but the cold of the room stayed with them. Anna felt sick. The sanctuary of the ranch suddenly felt very fragile. Caro didn't just want money. He wanted power. And he had just found a weapon to use against Eli. I'm sorry, Anna whispered as they reached the wagon. He is using me to get to you. He was coming for me anyway, Eli said, his jaw set hard. Get in the wagon. They rode out of town in silence, the weight of the encounter pressing down on them. But the sky had other plans. To the west, the horizon had disappeared. A wall of brown, thick, churning, and opaque, stretched from the earth to the heavens. It moved with terrifying speed, swallowing the hills, the scrub brush, and the light itself. Dust storm, Eli shouted, snapping the reins. Yeah! The horses panicked, fighting the bit. The wind hit them a moment later. Not a gust, but a physical blow. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. The air turned instantly into a choking cloud of grit. We can't outrun it, Eli yelled over the roar of the wind. He scanned the land, his eyes narrowing against the stinging sand. There, the outcrop! He steered the wagon off the track toward a cluster of sandstone boulders that jutted out of the earth like broken teeth. He hauled on the reins, bringing the team to a sliding halt in the lee of the largest rock. Get down, he commanded. Anna scrambled from the seat, the wind nearly tearing her dress from her body. The air was orange, thick and suffocating. She could not see 5 feet in front of her. Eli grabbed the horse blankets from the back of the wagon. He shoved Anna into the small hollow at the base of the rock, a shallow cave barely big enough for 2. He crowded in beside her, pulling the heavy wool blankets over their heads. The world vanished. There was only the roar of the wind, the screaming of the sand against the rock, and the cramped, hot darkness beneath the blanket. They were pressed together, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip. For weeks, they had danced around each other, maintaining a careful distance of 3 feet, of locked doors and averted eyes. Now, there was no space. The dust found its way in, filling Anna's nose and mouth. She coughed, panic rising in her chest. The confined space, the darkness, the heat. It triggered the old terror. She couldn't breathe. She felt the walls of the locked room closing in. She started to thrash, a whimper escaping her throat. Easy. Eli's voice was right at her ear, shouting to be heard over the storm. Breathe through the wool. Anna, breathe. She was trembling violently, her body vibrating against his. She was going to die here, buried in the dirt. Eli felt her panic. He knew he wasn't supposed to touch her. He had promised, but the storm was trying to kill them. Instinct took over. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her tight against his side, anchoring her to the earth. I have you, he said, his voice a rumble in his chest that she could feel against her own rib cage. I am not going to let the wind take you. Hold on. Anna froze at the contact. His arm was heavy, hard muscle beneath the canvas coat. Her first instinct was to fight, to claw at his eyes, to scream. But then the wind shrieked outside, a demonic sound that promised oblivion. The fear of the man was great, but the fear of the void was greater. She did not pull away. Instead, she buried her face in his coat, squeezing her eyes shut. She gripped the lapel of his jacket with both hands, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. They stayed like that for 2 hours. The storm raged, burying the wagon, stripping the paint from the wood. scouring the land. In the darkness under the blanket, the air was hot and smelled of their shared fear and sweat. Every time the wind gusted, Eli's grip tightened, shielding her, and every time, Anna leaned into him, not out of desire, but out of a desperate need to survive. When the wind finally died down to a moan, the silence that followed was deafening. Eli pushed the blanket back. They emerged into a ghost world. The sky was a bruised purple. The landscape was unrecognizable. The grass was gone, buried under drifts of silt. The fence lines were down. The wire snapped or buried. The branches of the mesquite bushes had been stripped bare of leaves. They stood up, shaking the dust from their clothes. They were both coated in a layer of fine gray powder. They looked like statues made of ash. Eli looked at the wagon. It was half buried. The horses stood with their heads low, their eyes rimmed with red mud, miserable but alive. He looked at Anna. She looked small, battered, her face streaked with mud where tears had mixed with the dust. But she was standing. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. She looked at him, really looked at him. He was covered in grime, his eyes red, his lips cracked. He had held her for 2 hours. He had been strong enough to crush her, but he had only been a shield. They worked in silence to dig out the wheels and calm the horses. The ride back to the ranch was slow. The devastation was everywhere. The land looked flayed. The ranch, when they reached it, looked even more pathetic than before. The porch roof had buckled. The garden Anna had tried to start was gone, buried under 6 inches of sand. It felt hopeless. The debt, the banker, the weather, the ruined land, it was all too much. But that night, after they had washed the worst of the grit from their faces and sat in the dim cabin eating cold beans because the stovepipe was clogged with sand, Anna spoke. "Eli?" He looked up, his eyes weary. "Yeah?" She looked at her hands, resting on the table. She could still feel the phantom weight of his arm around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said softly. For holding on. For not letting go when the wind got bad." Eli looked at her for a long moment. The memory of her body pressed against his. The desperate way she had clung to his coat was burned into his mind. It had been terrifying, but it had also been the first time in years he had felt like he was protecting something that mattered. "I told you," he said, his voice rough. "I keep my word. You are safe here, even from the wind." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, ruined land. The ranch was broken, his debts were mounting, and a powerful man wanted to destroy them. But as he listened to the soft sound of Anna clearing the table behind him, he realized that for the first time since his brother died, the house did not feel empty. The summer did not arrive in Blackwood Creek. It descended like a judgment. By July, the sun had turned from a source of light into a weapon, hammering the high plains with a relentless, white-hot fury that bleached the color from the sky. The wind, usually a nuisance, became a furnace blast, sucking the moisture from the soil until the earth cracked open in jagged fissures. On the ranch, the water levels in the nearest creek dropped until all that remained were stagnant, muddy pools buzzing with flies. The cattle, ribs showing through their dusty hides, grew restless and vocal, their lowing a constant, mournful sound that grated on the nerves. Eli made the decision at dawn. Staring out at the shimmering heat haze, "We have to move them," he said, pouring the last of the coffee into his tin cup. "There is water in the sweet gum drawer, but it is 6 miles north, rough country." Anna looked up from the basin where she was washing dishes. Her hands were red, the skin roughened by lye soap and hard water, but they were steadier than they had been a month ago. "Can the calves make it?" "They have to," Eli said grimly. "If they stay here, they die." The drive took 2 grueling days. Anna rode the gentle bay mare Eli had assigned to her, a horse with a soft mouth and a patient temperament. At first, she had sat the saddle like a sack of flour, rigid and terrified, clutching the horn until her fingers cramped. But necessity was a harsh teacher. Eli could not be everywhere at once, and he needed her to flank the herd, to turn the stragglers back into the bunch. Under the baking sun, surrounded by the smell of dust and animal sweat. Anna learned the language of the work. She learned to whistle to move a stubborn steer, to use the reins to guide the mare without jerking the bit. She learned to ignore the ache in her lower back and the stinging grit in her eyes. When they finally reached the draw, where a thin but steady stream of clear water trickled through the rocks, Eli watched her slide from the saddle. Her legs wobbled as she hit the ground, and she wiped a streak of dirt from her forehead with the back of her glove. "You did good," Eli said. He was not a man given to praise, so the words carried weight. Anna felt a strange warmth blossom in her chest, independent of the heat. "I did not fall off," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "That is half the battle," Eli replied. He began to unsaddle his horse, his movements slow with exhaustion. "Tomorrow, we start with the rest." The isolation of the distant camp forced a change in their dynamic. There was no cabin here, only a lean-to shelter in the vast, open canopy of stars. They slept on bedrolls separated by the dying embers of the fire, the darkness pressing in around them. In the evenings, before the light failed, Eli began to teach her. He realized that if the bank, or something worse, came for him, she would be left alone on this unforgiving land. She needed to know how to survive it. "Check the woodpile before you reach in," he told her one evening, using a long stick to poke at the stacked deadfall. "Rattlers like the heat, but they like the shade too. Listen for the dry buzz. If you hear it, back away slowly. Do not run." Then came the rifle. It was a heavy Winchester, the wood of the stock smooth from years of use. Anna held it as if it were a live viper. "It is just a tool," Eli said, his voice calm, like a skillet or a needle. "It only does what you tell it to." He stood behind her, instructing her on how to seat the butt of the rifle against her shoulder. "Tighter," he said. "If you leave a gap, the recoil will bruise you black and blue." He reached out to adjust her elbow, lifting it slightly. His hand was warm and large, his fingers brushing the sensitive skin of her inner arm. Anna went rigid, the sensation of a man standing behind her, his body heat radiating against her back, his hand controlling her limb. It triggered a violently physical memory. Her breath hitched, turning into a shallow, panic-stricken rhythm. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Eli felt the tension shoot through her frame. He saw the way her knuckles turned white on the barrel. Immediately, he stepped back, putting 2 yards of air between them. He cleared his throat, looking away toward the horizon, giving her the dignity of composing herself. "Sight down the barrel," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Squeeze the trigger. Do not pull it." Anna lowered the rifle, her hands shaking. She took a deep, ragged breath, fighting the urge to drop the weapon and run. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and raised the rifle again. She fired. The shot went wide, kicking up a spray of dirt 10 feet to the left of the target. But she had fired. Again, Eli said. These lessons brought a peculiar, razor-edged intimacy. They were dancing on the edge of a precipice. Every time he corrected her stance or handed her a canteen, the air between them crackled with a mix of fear and a longing neither dared to name. Eli fought his own battles. He was a man who had been alone for a long time, and the presence of a woman, especially one with Anna's quiet strength, woke parts of him he thought had died with his youth. He wanted to comfort her, to hold her when she stared into the fire with haunted eyes. But he knew that his touch was poison to her, so he kept his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the work. The heat wave broke, but the work did not. They returned to the main ranch to find that the calves born in the spring needed branding. It was a brutal, necessary task. Eli built a fire in the corral to heat the irons. The smell of burning wood mixed with the acrid scent of singed hair and the frightened bawling of the calves. Anna tried to help. Her job was to keep the tally book and hand Eli the irons. She stood by the fence, watching as Eli roped a calf and flanked it, wrestling the animal to the ground. "Iron," Eli called out. Anna grabbed the handle of the branding iron, wrapping a rag around it to protect her hand. She hurried forward. Eli pressed the glowing metal against the calf's hip. The animal screamed, a high, frantic sound of helplessness and pain. Smoke billowed up, thick and greasy. The sound tore through Anna. The world tilted. Suddenly, she was not in a corral in the open west. She was in a small, dark room. She could smell the smoke of a candle blown out. She could hear her own voice, screaming, begging, while a heavy weight crushed the breath from her lungs. The feeling of being held down, of pain being inflicted by someone who claimed to own her, it washed over her in a sickening wave. She dropped the iron in the dirt. Her knees gave way. Eli saw her sway. He released the calf, which scrambled up and bolted. He lunged forward, catching Anna by the elbows just before she hit the ground. "Anna!" he shouted. "Anna, look at me!" His grip was firm, meant to steady her, but to Anna, in the grip of the flashback, it was an assault. She felt hands on her arms. She felt a man's strength overpowering her. "No!" she shrieked. It was a feral, terrified sound. She shoved him, driving the heels of her hands into his chest with all the hysterical strength of her panic. "Get off! Do not touch me!" She scrambled backward, crab-walking in the dust until she could get to her feet. She did not look at him. She turned and ran for the cabin, her skirts flying, fleeing as if the devil himself were at her heels. Eli stood in the center of the corral, the dust settling around his boots. His chest heaved where she had struck him. He watched the cabin door slam shut. He looked at his hands, large, scarred, capable of violence even when he intended kindness. He cursed, a short, sharp word, and kicked the dirt. He finished the branding alone, working until his muscles burned and the sun dipped below the hills. When he finally entered the cabin, the interior was dark. There was no supper on the table. The door to the back room was shut, but he could hear the silence behind it, a heavy, listening silence. He washed the soot and blood from his hands in the basin. Then he walked to her door and knocked once, softly. "Anna." There was a long pause. Then the bolt slid back. The door opened a few inches. Anna stood there, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked like she had been shattered and glued back together. "I am sorry," she whispered. The shame in her voice was thick. I ruined the work. I am sorry I struck you." Eli shook his head. "The work got done, and you didn't hurt me." "I panicked," she said, her voice trembling. "The smell, the noise, it took me back. When you touched me, I didn't see you. Eli, I saw him." She wrapped her arms around herself, hugging her ribs. "My body, it remembers things my mind wants to forget. It reacts before I can stop it. I'm sorry. I know you were only helping." Eli looked at her, his jaw tight. He saw the exhaustion in her posture, the war she was fighting inside her own skin. He wanted to reach out, to brush a stray lock of hair from her forehead, but he kept his hands firmly at his sides. "You do not have to apologize for that," Eli said, his voice low and fierce. "I ain't good at soft things. Anna, I have been alone with cows and rocks for too long. But hear me on this. In this house, on this land, nothing happens to you that you do not choose. If you need to run, you run. If you need to shove me, you shove. You are safe here, even from me." Anna looked up at him, tears swimming in her eyes. "I want to believe that." "Then believe it," he said, "because it is the truth." That night, the barrier between them thinned. They sat on the porch, the night air cooling the sweat on their skin. The crickets sang in the dry grass. Anna spoke first, her voice quiet, merging with the darkness. "He was a deacon," she said. "Everyone in town thought he was a saint. He could quote the book of Job by heart." Eli stared out at the black shape of the hills. He did not interrupt. "He said it was my duty," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion, which made it all the more chilling. "He said a wife has no authority over her own body. He used the scripture like a whip. If I refused, he would lock me in the cellar. For days, no light. Just the rats and the cold." She took a shaky breath. "I tried to run once. He caught me at the livery. He dragged me back by my hair. He broke 2 of my ribs that night." He told the doctor I fell down the stairs. After that, I learned to go away inside my head, to leave my body while he did what he wanted. I would rather face a wolf in the open. Eli, I would rather face a rattlesnake than a man who thinks God gave him the right to hurt you. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of her confession. Eli felt a cold rage burning in his gut, a desire to find a man already dead and kill him again. "My brother," Eli said, his voice rasping like a saw on wood. "Samuel, he didn't just die. He suffered." Anna turned her head to look at his profile. "We found him 3 days after the storm broke." Eli said he was half buried in a drift against a fence post. He had tied a rope around his waist, tied the other end to a calf he was trying to save. He dragged that calf for 2 miles before the cold took him. Eli looked down at his hands. His hands, they were frozen around the rope. We had to cut the rope to free him. I carried him back to the house. My mother, she didn't scream. She just looked at me. She looked at me, and I saw it in her eyes. She was wondering why it was him and not me. She lost one son to the snow and the other to guilt. She died that spring. Gave up. He looked at Anna. I sent him out there. It was my order. Every acre of this land has his blood in it. That is why I can't lose it. If I lose the ranch, I lose him all over again. They sat in the dark, 2 broken people holding up their jagged pieces for the other to see. There was no physical touch, no hand-holding, no embrace, but the intimacy was staggering. They had stripped away the pretenses. They saw the shame the other carried and recognized it not as a fault, but as a wound. "It was not your fault," Anna said softly, "and it was not yours." Eli replied, "They might have sat there until dawn, finding comfort in the shared dark, but the world had a way of intruding." 2 days later, a rider approached the ranch. He rode a tall, sleek black gelding that looked out of place among the scrub brush and cactus. The rider wore a linen suit that was impeccably pressed, despite the ride from town. It was Caro. Eli was out on the ridge, checking the herd. Anna was in the garden patch, trying to coax life out of a few tomato plants she had watered with the dishwater. She heard the horse and stood up, shading her eyes. When she recognized the rider, her blood ran cold. Caro rode right up to the garden fence, looking down at her from the saddle. He smiled, but his eyes were flat and dead. "Mrs. Vance," he said. "Or do you go by something else now? It is hard to keep track of women in your profession." "What do you want?" Anna asked, gripping her hoe like a weapon. "Just inspecting my investment," Caro said, glancing around the dilapidated ranch. "Though I must say, the collateral is looking poor. I worry Eli is not managing his assets well. Perhaps his new housekeeper too distracts him." He leaned over the pommel of his saddle. "I know about Abilene. Anna, I have friends there. I know about the money you took when you ran. Theft is a hanging offense in some counties. Or at least prison." "I took nothing but what was mine," Anna said, her voice shaking. "My own mother's locket. That was all." "Who will the judge believe?" Caro asked smoothly. "The grieving church elders, or the runaway wife who is shacked up with a bankrupt rancher?" He lowered his voice. "I own the paper on this land. Anna, I can call it in whenever I choose. I can put Eli Thorne on the road with nothing but the shirt on his back. Unless what? Unless you both learn to be useful," Caro said. "I need men who can handle rough work, and women who can be hospitable. If Eli were to sign over the deed and work as my tenant, and if you were to be more accommodating to my guests, perhaps we could forget about the debt. And the sheriff," Anna felt sick. The trap was closing again. It was the same choice she had faced in town. Only now, Eli was caught in it with her. "Get off my land," the voice came from behind them. Eli had ridden up quietly, his horse's hooves muffled by the sand. He sat on his mare, his hand resting casually on the butt of his revolver. His face was a thundercloud. Caro straightened up, adjusting his cuffs. "Eli, I didn't hear you approach." "I noticed," Eli said. "State your business and ride on. Caro, before I mistake you for a trespasser." "Just having a friendly chat with the lady," Caro said, turning his horse. Reminding her of the realities of finance, "The note is due soon. Eli, do not forget." "I know what I owe," Eli said, "and I will pay for it. Without your kind of help." Caro chuckled darkly. "We shall see. Goodbye, Mrs. Vance." He spurred his horse and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust that tasted of money and menace. Anna stood frozen, the hoe slipping from her numb fingers. Eli dismounted and walked to her. He saw the terror in her face, the way she was trembling. "What did he say to you?" Eli asked. Anna looked at him. She saw a good man, a man who was working himself into the grave to save his family's legacy. And she saw herself as the stone around his neck. "He knows," Anna said, her voice hollow. "He knows the men from my past. He said he could have me arrested. He said he would take the land." She took a step toward him, her eyes pleading. "Eli, I have to leave." Eli frowned. "What?" "I am the weakness he is using against you," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "If I stay, he will use the rumors, the lies. He will destroy you to get to me, or destroy me to break you. You can't save the ranch with a woman like me in your house. You need a respectable woman, someone the town will accept." She grabbed his sleeve. "Let me go. I will pack my bag. I can catch the stage tomorrow. If I am gone, he has no leverage." Eli looked down at her. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the absolute willingness to sacrifice her own safety to save him. It hit him with the force of a physical blow. She was willing to go back out into the world that had chewed her up, just to spare him. He was torn. Part of him knew she was right. Caro was using her. Without her, the legal pressure might ease. He could fight for the land with clear hands. But the other part of him, the part that had listened to her breathing in the storm, the part that had watched her learn to ride, the part that had sat with her in the dark and shared his deepest shame, that part screamed at the thought of her leaving. He opened his mouth to tell her to stay, to tell her that the land wasn't worth her absence. But the words stuck in his throat. He was afraid of the violence Caro threatened, afraid that if she stayed, he couldn't protect her, afraid that his selfishness would be her undoing. He said nothing. Anna watched his face. She saw the conflict, but she also saw the hesitation, and in that hesitation, she read her answer. She dropped her hand from his sleeve. I will start packing," she whispered. She turned and walked into the cabin. Eli stood alone in the yard. The wind kicked up dust around his boots. He felt a hollow ache in his chest that was far worse than the cold that had taken his brother. That night, neither of them slept. The cabin was filled with a silence that was loud with unsaid words. Anna lay in her room, listening to the wind, tears sliding silently into her pillow. In the main room, Eli sat at the table, staring at the unlit lantern, the darkness pressing against his eyes, wrestling with a choice between his pride, his land, and the woman who had quietly, without him realizing it, become the center of his world. The trouble began not with a shout, but with a sharp, metallic ping of tension wire snapping, a sound that carried for a mile in the thin, dry air. It was mid-afternoon. The heat still held the high plains in a shimmering grip, though the light had taken on the brassy, hard quality that often preceded a change in weather. Eli was near the barn, repairing a stirrup leather. When he heard it, he froze, his head tilting to the west. A moment later, the sound of hooves, too many to be strays, and moving too fast, echoed off the canyon walls. He walked to the rise behind the cabin, his gait stiff but hurried. Shading his eyes against the glare, he saw them, 4 riders, mere specks against the bleached grass, driving a wedge of his cattle toward the southern pass. They were moving the herd hard, whipping the animals into a run that would melt the tallow off their bones. Caro! Eli spat the name into the dust. It was not a guess. The men rode with the arrogance of hired guns who knew the law was bought and paid for. He turned and strode back to the barn, moving with a cold, terrifying efficiency. He threw a saddle onto his fresh horse, a roan gelding with a temper, and cinched the girth tight. He slid his Winchester into the scabbard and checked the load in his revolver. Anna stood on the porch, drying her hands on her apron. She had seen him running. She saw the gun. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll that had been left out in the rain. "Eli?" Her voice was thin, trembling like a leaf in a gale. "They cut the west fence," Eli said, swinging into the saddle. "They are running the herd south. If I do not turn them before the pass, I lose the beef and the ranch both." "There are 4 of them," Anna said, gripping the porch railing. "I saw the dust. Eli, you are one man." "I know the land better," he said. He looked down at her, his gray eyes hard but not unkind. "Stay in the house. Lock the door. If I am not back by moonrise, you take the mare and you ride for the sheriff in the next county. Do not go to Blackwood Creek. Eli, please, lock the door. Anna." He spurred the roan, and the horse leapt forward, kicking up clods of dry earth. Anna watched him go, a solitary figure charging into the vastness of a land that wanted to swallow them both. She watched until he was nothing but a smudge of darkness against the horizon. And then she was alone. The silence returned, heavier than before. It was not the peaceful silence of the last few weeks. It was a predatory silence. The dog, a scruffy mongrel Eli kept for the coyotes, whined and crawled under the porch. Hours stretched. The sun began to dip, painting the sky in bruises of purple and iron gray. The wind changed direction, coming from the north now, carrying the scent of ozone and wet sage. A storm was building, a summer violator, fast and brutal. Anna paced the cabin floor. She cleaned the lantern chimney. She checked the bolt on the back door 3 times. Every creak of the settling wood sounded like a boot step. Every gust of wind sounded like a man's voice. Night fell, absolute and suffocating. The moon was swallowed by the cloud bank rolling in over the mountains. The first crack of thunder shook the ground, rattling the tin cups on the shelf. Then she heard it, the sound of hooves, slow, uneven, heavy. Anna rushed to the window, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She expected to see Eli, victorious, perhaps tired. A flash of lightning, stark and blinding, illuminated the yard. The roan gelding stood by the water trough. Its sides were heaving, slick with sweat and foam. Mud coated its flanks. The saddle was empty. The reins trailed in the mud, one leather strap broken. Anna's stomach dropped as if the floor had opened up beneath her. She stood frozen, her hand pressed to her mouth to stifle a scream. The horse dipped its head to drink, exhausted. "He is dead," a voice whispered in her mind. It was the voice of her past, the voice that told her happiness was a sin and safety was a lie. "He is dead, and they are coming for you." She looked at the dark, empty land beyond the fence. It was terrifying. It was full of wolves and ravines and men with guns who took what they wanted. The old Anna, the woman who had hidden in a cellar while her husband preached salvation, would have bolted the door and hidden under the bed until the end came. But that woman had not ridden through a dust storm. That woman had not learned to shoot a rifle. That woman had not looked into the gray eyes of a man who had promised her she was safe. Anna turned from the window. She moved with a strange, detached calm. She took the heavy lantern from the hook. She took Eli's spare coat from the peg. She went to the corner and picked up the Winchester rifle. She walked out into the rising wind. She caught the roan, speaking low, soothing nonsense words to the spooked animal. She mounted, her skirts bunching around her legs, the rifle heavy and awkward in her hand. "Take me to him," she whispered into the horse's mane, kicking her heels into its sides. "Take me back." The horse, creature of habit and herd, turned and began to trot back the way it had come. The storm broke in earnest 10 minutes later. The rain did not fall. It was driven sideways in sheets, stinging her face like buckshot. The temperature plummeted. Lightning tore the sky open, jagged fissures of white fire that lit up the scrub brush in terrifying, strobe light glimpses. Anna rode blind, trusting the horse. She was soaked to the skin instantly, her teeth chattering, her hands numb on the reins. Fear was a cold stone in her gut, but beneath it burned a fierce, desperate refusal. Not him, she thought. Please, God, not him. They rode for an hour, perhaps two. The horse slowed, navigating the treacherous footing of a rocky draw. The roan stopped, snorting, refusing to go further. Anna raised the lantern, the flame sputtering behind the glass. "Eli!" she screamed. The wind tore the name from her lips and swallowed it. "Eli!" A low sound came from the darkness below the lip of the ravine. A groan. Anna scrambled off the horse, nearly falling in the slick mud. She slid down the embankment, the shale tearing at her dress. He was lying in the bottom of the wash, half submerged in the rising runoff water. He was curled on his side, his face pale as milk in the lantern light. There was a dark gash on his forehead, blood matting his hair. His right leg was twisted at a sickening angle. "Eli!" she sobbed, dropping to her knees in the mud beside him. She touched his face. His skin was clammy, cold as the rain. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. They were glassy, unfocused. "Anna!" he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Go back. Unsafe. I am not leaving you," she said, her voice fierce. "Leg," he groaned, his head lolling back. "The horse threw me. Lightning." The water in the wash was rising. If she left him here, he would drown or freeze before dawn. "You have to get up," she told him, grabbing his arm. "Eli, you have to help me." He was a big man, heavy with muscle and bone. Anna was slight. The struggle to get him up the muddy bank was a nightmare of leverage and grit. She shoved, she pulled, she screamed with effort. Eli, driven by some primal instinct to survive, managed to drag himself upward, groaning with every movement of his shattered leg. Getting him into the saddle was impossible. He could not climb. "The rock!" she shouted over the thunder. She guided the horse next to a shelf of sandstone. "Lean on me." She wedged her shoulder under his good arm. He screamed as he put weight on the bad leg, a sound that tore through her heart. But he managed to half fall, half climb onto the horse's back. He slumped forward over the animal's neck, barely conscious. Anna did not mount. She could not risk the extra weight. She took the reins and began to walk, leading the horse through the storm. The walk back was a blur of misery. The mud sucked at her boots. The cold gnawed at her bones. She fell twice, skinning her palms, but she got up each time, checking Eli's breathing, and kept walking. She spoke to him constantly, her voice cracking. "Stay with me. We are almost there. Just a little farther." "Do not you dare leave me alone. Eli Thorne, do not you dare." When the cabin finally emerged from the dark, it looked like heaven. Getting him inside was another battle, but desperation gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. She got him to the bed in the main room, stripping the sodden coat from his shoulders. She lit the stove, her fingers shaking so badly she wasted 3 matches. She boiled water. She found the whiskey bottle in the cupboard. She knelt beside the bed and cut away his boot. The leather was tough, but she sawed through it with the kitchen knife. His ankle was swollen to the size of a melon, purple and angry, but the bone did not protrude. She washed the blood from his face, her touch gentle but firm. She bound his ribs where he flinched at her touch. She poured whiskey down his throat when he moaned, and then she poured some on a rag to clean the gash on his head. He was delirious now, trashing in the grip of a fever brought on by shock and exposure. "The wire," he muttered, his eyes squeezing shut. "Samuel, tell Samuel the wire is down." "Shh," Anna soothed, placing a cool cloth on his forehead. "Rest now." The nearness of him, his heavy body on the bed, his chest bare where she had unbuttoned his shirt to check for injuries, terrified her. It was too intimate, too close to the memories of the bedroom she had escaped. But as she looked at his face, drawn with pain, the fear receded, replaced by a fierce, tiger-like protectiveness. This body had shielded her from the dust storm. These hands had built a lock for her door. This man had ridden out to save his home, and by extension, her sanctuary. She realized then, with a jolt that shook her more than the thunder. That she would walk through hell for him. She would face Caro. She would face the town. She would face her own ghosts before she let him be taken. The storm worsened, hammering the roof. The cabin was drafty. Eli shivered violently, his teeth clicking together. Anna dragged her mattress from the back room. She pulled it right up to the side of his bed. She piled every quilt they owned on top of him. She lay down on her mattress, mere inches from him, her hand resting on his chest to feel the rise and fall of his breathing. "I am here," she whispered into the dark. "I am here." For 3 days, the fever held him. The storm passed, leaving the land scoured and raw. But the battle inside the cabin continued. Anna barely slept. She fed him broth, spoon by spoon. She wiped the sweat from his face. She emptied the basin. In the quiet hours of the night, when the lamplight cast long shadows on the walls, she talked to him. She said things she could never say to his face, things that had been locked in her heart for years. "I never knew what safe felt like," she confessed one night, wringing out a cloth. "Not until I came here. I thought God had forgotten me. But then I met a man who didn't ask for anything but honest work." She smoothed the hair back from his forehead. "I am afraid, Eli. I am terrified. Not of you. I am afraid of what it would mean to need you, because everyone I have ever needed has hurt me or left me. If I need you and you leave, I will not survive it." Eli turned his head, murmuring something unintelligible, seeking the coolness of her hand. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Eli woke to the smell of coffee. His head throbbed, and his leg felt like it was being crushed in a vice. But his mind was clear. He turned his head. Anna was asleep on the floor beside him. She was lying on her mattress, but her upper body was curled toward him. Her head rested on the edge of his bed. Her hand was loosely gripping the corner of his blanket, as if she were anchoring him to the earth. He watched her for a long time. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the exhaustion etched into her face. He realized she had saved him. The ruined woman, the sparrow who flinched at shadows, had ridden into a storm and dragged him out of a grave. He reached out, his hand trembling with weakness, and lightly touched her hair. She woke instantly, sitting up with a gasp. "Eli?" "I am alive," he rasped, his voice rusty. Tears filled her eyes. She pressed her face into the mattress to hide them. I thought you were gone." "Not yet," he said. "Not yet." The recovery was slow. The leg was badly sprained, the ligaments torn, and his ribs were bruised deep. He could not ride. He could barely walk to the porch. They were forced into a domestic intimacy that was tighter than anything they had experienced. The cabin became their whole world. Eli whittled. He took pieces of firewood and carved them into small, intricate shapes: horses, birds, a wolf. It kept his hands busy when he couldn't work. Anna read to him. She found a tattered copy of Ivanhoe in his trunk, and she read aloud in the evenings, her voice soft and steady, transporting them from the dusty plains to medieval tournaments. They ate together. They sat by the fire together. The physical distance they had maintained, the 3 feet of polite separation, vanished. She had to help him stand. She had to change the bandages on his leg. He learned the rhythm of her breathing. She learned the way his eyes crinkled when he found a passage in the book amusing. Then came the night the autumn chill arrived early. A norther blew in, dropping the temperature 30 degrees in an hour. The cabin, poorly insulated and drafty, grew bitterly cold. The firewood supply was low. Eli hadn't been able to chop, and Anna could only gather kindling. They huddled near the stove, but the cold seeped into the corners. Eli, weakened by his injuries, began to shiver. The tremors racked his body, causing his broken ribs to ache fiercely. Anna watched him, wrapped in her shawl. She saw the pain in his face every time a shiver hit him. "You are freezing," she said. "I'm fine," he lied through chattering teeth. "You are not. The cold will settle in your chest. You will get pneumonia." He looked at her. The single narrow bed in the main room was the warmest place. closest to the stove. Her mattress on the floor was in the draft. "Anna," he said, his voice hesitant. "Bring your quilts. Come up here." She froze. "What?" "The bed," he said. "It is warmer. We can share the heat. I swear to you, I will not touch you. I will stay on my side. I can't stop shaking." Anna looked at the bed. It was narrow. They would be touching. She looked at Eli. His face was pale, his lips blue-tinged. He was not looking at her with lust. He was looking at her with desperation and a careful, respectful hope. He was asking for survival, not possession. "All right," she whispered. She blew out the lamp. In the darkness, she climbed onto the bed, lying stiffly on the very edge, her back to him. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. They pulled the quilts up over them. The heat of his body was shocking. It radiated across the small space between them. Slowly, the shivering stopped. For a long time, there was only the sound of the wind outside and their own breathing. But the silence was not empty. It was electric. Every inch of air between them hummed with awareness. "Are you warm enough?" he asked quietly. "Yes." "Anna?" "Yes?" "I never thought I would have this," he said, his voice rumbling in his chest. "A home that felt like a home. I thought I would die out here alone, just another old bachelor rancher." "I never thought I would be safe," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought my life was over." "It isn't over," Eli said. "It is just starting. If we can keep the land—" "We will," she said. The word "we" hung in the air. A promise. They talked then, in the safety of the dark, about things they had never dared to voice. "I wanted children once," Anna admitted. Before I knew what marriage was. I wanted a little girl. To braid her hair. I wanted a son," Eli said. "To teach him the land. To leave him something better than debt." The conversation drifted into silence, but the tension remained. It changed, though. It shifted from the tension of strangers to the tension of two people who were starving for each other but terrified to eat. Anna turned onto her back. Her hand brushed his arm. She flinched, pulling back, but then she stopped. She didn't want to pull back. She reached out again, finding his hand in the darkness. His fingers were rough, calloused, warm. He went perfectly still. He did not grab her hand. He let his palm lie open, waiting. She laced her fingers through his. He exhaled, a long, shaky breath. He squeezed her hand gently. Anna moved. She scooted closer, inches at a time, until her side pressed against his. She laid her head on his chest, right over his heart. She could hear it beating, heavy, fast, strong. "Eli?" she whispered. He brought his other hand up, hovering over her, then slowly, carefully, he laid it on her waist. He did not pull, he just rested it there. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice thick. "Tell me to stop, Anna, and I will stop. I will get on the floor. I will go outside." She trembled against him. The contact was overwhelming. It was a terrified memory warring with a new, desperate desire. She felt his hardness, his strength, but she also felt his restraint. He was trembling too. She realized he was as afraid as she was. Afraid of hurting her, afraid of ruining the fragile thing they had built. She didn't want him to stop. She wanted to burn the past out of her blood. She wanted to be claimed, not as a possession, but as a woman chosen. She wanted to drown the voice of the preacher and the judgment of the town in the silence of this man's love. She turned her face up to his in the dark. Her lips brushed his jaw. "I can't take it," she whispered, the words breaking from her throat in a sob of release. "The thinking, the remembering. I can't take it. Just do it, deeper. Make me forget. Eli, please." It was a plea for him to overwhelm her, to take the choice away so she wouldn't have to be brave. But Eli did the unthinkable. He did not crush her. He did not seize her. He pulled back slightly. He brought his hand to her face, cupping her cheek. His thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't known fell. "No," he whispered against her lips. "Not to forget, to remember. You are here, with me." Anna. He kissed her. It was not a devouring kiss. It was slow. It was a question. It was pouring out of every silent hour, every defended glance, every moment of longing they had suppressed. He waited for her to kiss him back. And she did, with a small, broken sound. She opened to him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down. The storm howled outside, rattling the bones of the house. But inside, the storm was different. It was the breaking of a dam. Clothes were shed with frantic, fumbling hands. Skin met skin, hot and electric. When he finally moved over her, he watched her face in the shadows. He moved with agonizing slowness, giving her the power, letting her set the pace. He made love to her as if she were something holy, something precious that had been broken and glued back together with gold. And for the first time in her life, Anna did not go away inside her head. She stayed. She felt the weight of him, the heat of him, the way he murmured her name like a prayer against her throat. The pain of the past was not erased, but it was overlaid with something new, pleasure, safety, and the terrifying, beautiful realization that she belonged to herself, and she chose to give herself to him. The sun rose over the high plains the next morning with a clarity that seemed to strip the world of its shadows. The light that filtered through the small window of the cabin was pale and clean, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in months, the silence inside the cabin was not a heavy, suffocating thing, but a hush of reverence. Anna woke first. She lay still, the weight of the quilt heavy and warm atop her, listening to the steady, rhythmic breathing of the man beside her. For a terrifying moment, the old panic flared, the instinct to curl into a ball, to hide, to dissociate from her own skin. But then she felt the solid warmth of Eli's arm, not trapping her, but resting near her, a presence that demanded nothing. She turned her head. Eli was asleep, his face softened by rest, the deep lines around his mouth smoothed out. He looked younger, less like a man carved from granite and more like a man who had finally set down a heavy load. She slipped from the bed, shivering in the morning chill, and dressed quickly. When Eli woke 10 minutes later, the coffee was already boiling on the stove. He sat up, rubbing a hand over his face, and their eyes met across the small room. There was a shyness between them now, a fragile, luminous quality to the air. It was as if they were strangers meeting for the first time, yet simultaneously two people who had known each other for a lifetime. "Coffee is ready," Anna said, her voice soft. "Thank you," Eli replied. He stood and walked to her. He did not grab her. He reached out and took the cup she offered, his fingers brushing hers. The contact sent a jolt through them both, a reminder of the heat that had filled the room only hours before. He held her gaze, his gray eyes dark and serious. "Morning, Anna." "Morning, Eli." It was a simple exchange, but it carried the weight of a vow. In that quiet kitchen, with the smell of chicory and wood smoke in the air, they were no longer just a rancher and a housekeeper. They were conspirators in a world that wanted them separate. But the world outside the cabin had no respect for their fragile peace. By noon, a rider appeared at the gate. It was a boy from the livery stable in town, clutching a sealed envelope. He looked nervous, eyeing the rifle leaning against the porch rail, and thrust the letter at Eli before kicking his pony into a gallop. Eager to be away, Eli opened the letter on the porch. Anna watched his face harden. The softness of the morning evaporated, replaced by the grim mask of the survivor. "It is Caro," Eli said, his voice flat. "He has filed a motion. He claims the winter losses voided our extension. He is in full debt, immediately." Anna felt the blood drain from her face. "Can he do that?" "He owns the judge, the sheriff, and the bank," Eli said, crushing the paper in his fist. "He can do whatever he pleases, unless I can stop him." "We have to go to town," Anna said, though the thought made her stomach turn. "I have to go," Eli corrected. "You stay here." "No," she said, stepping forward. The fear was there, trembling in her hands, but her voice was steady. "He is doing this because of me, because Because I am here, I will not hide behind you while you fight him." Eli looked at her. He saw the terror she was fighting, but he also saw the steel spine that had carried him out of the ravine. He nodded once. "Get your bonnet." The ride to Blackwood Creek was silent. When they reached the edge of town, the atmosphere was different than before. It was thicker, heavier. Heads turned as their wagon rolled down the main street. People stopped their conversations mid-sentence to stare. They were not just looking at the scarred rancher and the stray woman anymore. They were looking at the scandal, the rumor mill, fed by Caro's whispers and the town's own boredom, had spun a web of judgment. She has snared another one. The whispers went. Living in sin, a harlot in a house of mourning. Eli tied the team in front of the general store. He needed ammunition and grain. Regardless of the debt, he helped Anna down, his hands lingering on her waist for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Inside the store, the air went dead still. Mrs. Gable, the wife of the town doctor, was standing at the counter measuring out the ribbon. When she saw Anna, she audibly sniffed and gathered her skirts, pulling them tight against her legs as if afraid the dust on Anna's hem might be contagious. "Come, Clara." "Mrs." Gable said sharply to her young daughter. She placed a hand over the child's eyes, turning her forcefully toward the door. "We do not need to see such things." Anna shrank back, her shoulders hunching. She felt dirty. She felt the phantom imprint of the scarlet letter on her chest. She stepped toward the wall, trying to make herself invisible. Eli, who had been inspecting a box of nails, stopped. He slowly turned. The sound of his boots on the floorboards was loud in the quiet store. "Mrs. Gable," Eli said. His voice was not a shout, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was the low, rumbling growl of a wolf guarding its den. The woman froze, her hand on the doorknob. She turned, her nose in the air. "Mr. Thorne, I have nothing to say to you." "Then listen," Eli said. He walked to the center of the room. He looked at the shopkeeper, at the two cowboys by the Cracker Barrel, and finally at Mrs. Gable. "Anna Vance lives under my roof," Eli said, his words crisp and clear. "She works harder before sunrise than most of you do in a week. She saved my life in the storm when the rest of you were hiding under your beds. She is a decent woman, and from this moment on, anyone who speaks of her as anything less will answer to me." He let the threat hang in the air. It was not a threat of violence, but of consequence. It was a man staking his reputation, his honor, and his physical safety on the character of a woman the town had discarded, Mrs. Gable turned pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She yanked the door open and fled, dragging her daughter behind her. Anna stood by the wall, her heart pounding. She felt exposed, terrified, but also enveloped in a warmth so fierce it burned. No one had ever defended her. No one had ever stood between her and the stones. Eli turned to her, his eyes softening. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she whispered, but the victory was short-lived. As they stepped out onto the boardwalk, blinking in the harsh sunlight, a shadow fell over them. Sheriff Miller stood there, his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. Behind him stood two deputies, and behind them, watching from the balcony of the hotel, was Caro. "Eli," the sheriff said. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I am sorry about this." "Sorry about what?" "Miller?" Eli asked, his hand drifting toward his hip. "Don't," the sheriff warned, his hand dropping to his own Colt. "I have a warrant." "Eli?" "For her," he nodded at Anna. "On what charge?" Eli demanded, stepping in front of her. "Grand larceny," the sheriff said, "and abandoning a lawful spouse. A wire came in from Abilene. Seems Mrs. Vance took some jewelry that didn't belong to her when she ran family heirlooms. My mother's locket." Anna gasped, peering around Eli's shoulder. "It was my mother's. He took it from me, but it was mine." "That is for the judge to decide, ma'am," Miller said. "Right now, I have to take you in." "She is not going anywhere," Eli said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. Eli, look around, Miller said, gesturing to the deputies who had unholstered their weapons. Do not get yourself killed. It won't help her. Anna saw the tension in Eli's back. She saw the way his muscles coiled, ready to spring. She knew he would draw. She knew he would die right there in the dust for her. No! She grabbed his arm. Eli, no, do not, please. Eli looked down at her, his eyes wild with frustration. I will go, she said, her voice trembling. Do not fight them, not here. Eli looked at the deputies, then up at the balcony where Caro stood smoking a cigar. He realized the trap. Caro wanted him to draw. Caro wanted him dead or imprisoned so the land would be free for the taking. I will get you out, Eli promised, his voice choking with rage. I swear it. The sheriff stepped forward and took Anna's arm. He did not handcuff her, but he led her away toward the small brick jailhouse at the end of the street. Eli watched her go. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. He felt a powerlessness that was more bitter than gall. The jail cell was small, damp, and smelled of unwashed bodies and old straw. When the heavy iron door clanged shut, locking with a harsh, metallic finality, Anna cried out. It was an involuntary sound, a sharp intake of breath that turned into a sob. The sound of the lock turning triggered a cascade of memories so vivid she fell to her knees. She was back in the cellar. The darkness pressed against her eyes. She could smell the mold. She could hear the heavy footsteps of the Reverend Vance above her head, pacing, quoting scripture about obedience. Wives, submit. She crawled to the corner of the cot and curled into a ball. Covering her ears, I'm not there, she whispered frantically. I am not there. I am in Blackwood Creek. Eli is coming. Eli is coming. But the hours dragged on. The sun moved across the floor. The shadows lengthened. Outside, Eli was a man possessed. He stormed into the bank, but Caro refused to see him. He went to the telegraph office, trying to send a message to a lawyer in Denver, but the operator told him the lines were down. A lie. Eli knew. Bought by Caro's coin, he rode to the judge's house. Judge Thaddeus Moore was a circuit judge, a man who traveled from town to town. He had just arrived that morning. He was a stern man with a beard like a bristling hedge, known for being harsh but generally fair. Eli pounded on the door until the housekeeper answered. He pushed past her, finding the judge in his study. She is innocent, Eli said without preamble. The charges are a fabrication by a man who wants my land. Judge Moore looked up from his book, spectacles perched on his nose. Mr. Thorne, I assume you are speaking of the woman currently residing in the county jail? It is Caro, Eli said, pacing the small rug. He bought the debt on my ranch. Now he is using her to squeeze me. The jewelry was her own dowry. She ran to save her life. That may be, the judge said calmly. But the law requires evidence. A warrant has been sworn. I will hear the case tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Until then, she stays where she is. She cannot stay in there, Eli said, his voice cracking. You don't understand. Being locked up, it will break her. Then bring me proof of her innocence. Mr. Thorne, or proof of this conspiracy you claim. Eli left the judge's house and rode back to the bank. He waited by the back door until Caro emerged at sunset, heading for his carriage. Eli stepped out of the shadows, blocking the path. You have gone too far. Caro. Caro stopped. He did not look afraid. He looked bored. I am simply retrieving what is owed to the investors, Eli, and assisting the law in apprehending a fugitive. What do you want? Eli asked. Cut the act. What is the price? Caro smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. Practicality. I like that. Here is the deal. Eli, you sign over the deed to the ranch, fully. You also sign a statement, an affidavit, testifying that you were unaware of Mrs. Vance's criminal past, and that upon discovering her character, you turned her in, you denounce her. Eli went still. And if I do, I drop the foreclosure lawsuit. I will give you $500 to start fresh somewhere else, and I withdraw my support for the prosecution in Abilene. Without the bank's pressure, the charges against her will likely be dismissed as a domestic squabble. She goes free. You go free. I got the land. It was a clean way out. He could save her. He could save himself from ruin. All it cost was his home, his brother's legacy, and his honor. He would have to publicly betray her name to save her life. I will let you know, Eli said, his voice like gravel. Court is at 9, Caro said, climbing into his carriage. Do not be late. Eli rode back to the ranch in the dark. The cabin was empty. It felt cold, like a tomb. He lit the lamp and sat at the table. He looked at the deed to the ranch, kept in a tin box. He looked at the affidavit Caro had pressed into his hand, a pre-written lie that painted Anna as a thief and a whore. He looked at the back room. He thought of the nights they had spent talking in the dark. He thought of the way she had looked at him on the porch. With trust, if he signed the paper. He saved her body but destroyed her spirit. He would be confirming everything the town said about her. He would be just another man who used her and discarded her for his own gain. But if he didn't sign, she might go to prison, and he would lose the land anyway. Eli stood up. He walked to the stove. He opened the iron door and stared into the embers. There is more to life than land, he whispered to the empty room. He crumpled the affidavit, the paper that guaranteed his safety, and tossed it into the fire. He watched it curl, brown, and burst into flame. He watched his escape route turn to ash. He would not lie. He would not betray her. He would fight Caro with the truth. And if they went down, they would go down standing. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. The air was stifling, smelling of sweat and wool. Every seat was taken. The town had turned out for the show. Anna sat at the defendant's table, looking small and frail. She wore the same gray dress, now wrinkled from a night in the cell. Her hands were clasped in her lap, trembling. She kept her eyes on the floor. Caro sat with the prosecutor, looking smug. The proceedings were swift. The prosecutor read the charges. He painted Anna as a black widow, a woman who seduced a godly man in Abilene, robbed him, and fled to prey on the sympathies of a lonely rancher. Anna was called to the stand. She spoke in a whisper. "It was my locket," she said, her voice shaking. "My mother gave it to me on her deathbed. My husband, he said it was vanity. He locked it away. When I left, I just took what was mine." "And you abandoned your husband?" The prosecutor boomed. "A man of the cloth?" "I left to save my life," Anna said, tears slipping down her cheeks. He hurt me." "Hurt you?" The prosecutor scoffed. "Did you report this to the sheriff in Abilene?" "No." "Did you tell a doctor?" "No." "So we have only the word of a thief against the memory of a respected dead man." The town murmured. It looked bad. Anna looked like a liar. She looked exactly like what they wanted her to be. "I call Eli Thorne." The defense attorney, a court-appointed man who looked like he'd rather be fishing, announced. Eli took the stand. He looked tired. He had not slept, but his eyes were clear. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, "you have been harboring the defendant. What do you have to say?" Eli looked at Anna. He saw the shame hunching her shoulders. He looked at the town. "I don't know what happened in Abilene," Eli began, his voice steady. "I wasn't there, but I know what I see on my ranch." He turned to the jury. "I see a woman who flinches when a hand is raised too fast. I see a woman who wakes up screaming in the night, begging a dead man to stop hitting her. I see a woman who works until her hands bleed to pay for her keep." The courtroom went quiet. "Mr. Caro offered me a deal last night," Eli continued, turning to point a finger at the banker. "He told me if I signed over my land and signed a paper calling this woman a whore, he would make the charges go away." Caro jumped up. "Objection, hearsay. Sit down. Mr. Caro." The judge barked. "Go on, Mr. Thorne." "I burned that paper," Eli said, "because it was a lie. This woman is under my protection. Not because I own her, but because she chose to stay. And I plan to make her my wife, if she will have me." A gasp rippled through the room. Anna's head snapped up. She stared at Eli, her mouth slightly open. He had claimed her, publicly, in front of the people who despised her. He had offered her his name. "I plan to marry her," Eli repeated, his voice ringing off the rafters. "And I will not let a thief in a silk suit destroy her life to get my land. If you want to send someone to jail, send me, but let her be." The judge looked at Eli. He looked at Caro, who was sweating now, his composure cracking. He looked at Anna, whose face was shining with a mixture of shock and adoration. Judge Moore cleared his throat. He picked up his gavel. "This court," the judge said, "is not a tool for land speculation. The charges from Abilene are unverified. The prosecution has failed to produce a witness or the alleged stolen item. Furthermore, the testimony regarding attempted coercion by Mr. Caro casts significant doubt on the validity of this entire proceeding." He brought the gavel down. Bang! "Case dismissed. Mrs. Vance, you are free to go." The courtroom erupted. Anna slumped in her chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing with relief. Eli vaulted the railing and was at her side in a second, pulling her up, shielding her from the crowd. They walked out of the courthouse into the blinding noon sun. The air tasted sweet. Caro was waiting by the steps. His face was purple with rage. "You think you have won?" he hissed, stepping into their path. "You have nothing, Thorne. The debt is still due. I will ruin you. I will bleed you dry. And if the law won't help me—" He let the sentence trail off, his eyes drifting to the pistol on his hip. "Accidents happen on the range. Stay off my land. Caro," Eli said, "next time you come, bring more men." They pushed past him and climbed into the wagon. The ride home was different. The fear was gone, replaced by a heavy, solemn realization of what lay ahead. They were at war now. Caro would not stop. But as the sun set, turning the sky into a canvas of violent violet and gold, they stood on the porch of the cabin. The ranch was quiet. The wind whispered through the grass. Eli turned to Anna. He took her hands. They were rough, calloused hands, both of them. "I meant what I said," he told her softly. "In the courtroom—" "I know," Anna whispered. "I am not a rich man. Anna, I have a broken ranch, a mountain of debt, and a fight coming that might kill me. I have nothing to offer you but hard work and trouble." He looked down at her, his eyes searching hers. "But I love you. I love you more than I love this land, more than I love my pride." He paused, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Will you marry me, not for protection, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to be with me?" Anna looked at him. She thought of the long, lonely years. She thought of the pain. And then she looked at the man who had burned his safety to keep her warm. "Yes," she said, the tears blurring the stars above his head. "Yes, Eli, I choose you." He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time, under the vast, indifferent sky of the West, they were not two lonely people fighting the dark. They were a fire that the wind could not blow out. The wedding took place on a Tuesday, under a sky the color of bruised iron. There were no bells, no organ music, and no congregation to stand in judgment or celebration. They stood in the dusty office of the Justice of the Peace, a man named Elias Finch, who smelled of pipe tobacco and ink. The room was small, cluttered with stacks of legal ledgers and wanted posters curling on the walls. Anna wore her gray dress, the only one she owned that was fit for public eyes, though she had washed it in the creek until the fabric was stiff and clean. She had braided her hair tightly, weaving a single blue ribbon through the plaits, a ribbon Eli had bought her in town, a small, silent token of a courtship that had happened in the spaces between survival. Eli stood beside her, his boots polished with grease, his white shirt starched stiff. He looked uncomfortable in the confinement of the room, a man built for open horizons trapped between four walls. But when he looked at her, the walls vanished. "Do you, Eli Thorne, take this woman?" Finch mumbled, rushing through the words as if he feared the sheriff might burst in to stop them. "I do," Eli said. His voice was not loud, but it was solid, like a fence post driven deep into the hardpan. "And do you, Anna Vance?" Finch paused, squinting at the paper. Anna Vance. Take this man. Anna looked at Eli. She looked at the scar on his jaw, the gray in his stubble, the way his large hands hung at his sides, trembling slightly. She knew why they trembled. It was not fear of her. It was the terrifying weight of hope. He was daring to believe that he could keep her, that the world would let them have this. I do, she whispered. Finch stamped the paper. Then by the power vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you man and wife. That will be $2. They walked out of the office into the glare of the afternoon. The town was busy. A wagon loaded with lumber rattled past. 2 women stood on the boardwalk, their bonnets close together. When they saw Eli and Anna emerge, the women fell silent. They looked at Anna's hand, resting on Eli's arm. And then they looked away, their mouths thinning in disgust. Shameless, one whispered, loud enough to carry on the wind, but further down the street, an old woman selling eggs, a widow who had buried 3 sons and a husband to the cholera, caught Anna's eye. She did not look away. She nodded, a slow, grave dip of her chin. It was a recognition of the battlefield, a salute from one survivor to another. They rode back to the ranch in the buckboard wagon. They did not speak much. The silence between them was new. It was no longer the silence of 2 people hiding from the world. It was the silence of 2 people who had just declared war on it. They were married. They were bound. And they knew, as they passed the boundary line of the ranch, that they would have to fight for every inch of peace they found. The attack came 3 days later. The wind had been blowing from the south for 48 hours. A dry, relentless gale that sucked the moisture from the grass and turned the sagebrush into tinder. The sky was a pale, hazy white. Eli was in the corral, shoeing the bay mare. Anna was on the porch, churning butter, the rhythmic thump-splash of the dasher marking time. Then, she smelled it. It was distinct from the smell of the wood stove. It was sharper, wilder, the scent of burning pine and dry grass. She stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked south. A gray plume was rising against the horizon, growing darker and wider by the second. Beneath it, a dull orange glow flickered, dancing like a living thing. "Eli!" she screamed. Eli dropped the hoof and vaulted the fence. He took one look at the smoke and cursed. "Fire! Get the sacks! Get the shovels!" It was not an accident. Fire started by lightning happened, but the sky was clear. Fire started by carelessness started slowly. This was a line of fire, springing up across a mile-wide front, driven by the wind straight toward the ranch house. They ran. For the next 6 hours, they ceased to be human beings. They became creatures of soot and sweat, fighting a monster that wanted to eat their world. They beat the flames with wet gunny sacks, the heavy burlap hissing as it struck the burning grass. The heat was a physical blow, searing their lungs, singing their eyebrows. The smoke was blinding, a choking gray fog that turned the sun into a blood-red disk. "The barn!" Eli shouted over the roar of the fire. "We have to trench the barn." They dug fire breaks, their shovels ringing against the rocky soil. They worked side by side, coughing, their eyes streaming. Anna's dress was torn, her face blackened with ash. But she did not stop. She shoveled dirt onto the creeping flames until her arms felt like lead. The wind shifted. It was a sudden, cruel twist of nature. The fire, which had been moving north, suddenly hooked east, racing through a patch of dry mesquite with a sound like a freight train. Anna was cut off. She had been beating a flare-up near the creek bed. Suddenly, a wall of orange fire rose up between her and the house. The heat was instantaneous and terrifying. She stumbled back, covering her face, but the fire was faster. It curled around her, trapping her against the steep bank of the dry creek. "Eli!" she screamed, the sound tearing from her raw throat. Eli heard her. He was 50 yards away, fighting to save the corral. He turned and saw the wall of fire. He saw the glimpse of her gray dress through the smoke. He did not hesitate. He did not think. He dropped his shovel and ran. He ran straight toward the fire. He grabbed a horse blanket from the fence rail, dunked it in the trough, and threw it over his head. He charged through the wall of flame. The heat sucked the air from his lungs. He felt the hair on his arm singe, but he broke through to the pocket of clear air where Anna was huddled, coughing, her eyes wide with terror. "Get under!" he roared, throwing the wet blanket over both of them. He wrapped his arm around her waist, lifting her half off the ground. "Run! With me! Now!" They ran back through the inferno. For 3 seconds, the world was nothing but fire and noise. Anna felt the heat blistering her skin through the wool. She felt Eli's body shielding hers, taking the brunt of the flames. They burst out the other side, stumbling into the blackened dirt of the yard, gasping for air. They fell to their knees, coughing up black phlegm, clutching each other. They were alive, but the fire was still coming. Then, through the haze, they heard it. Hoofbeats. Riders were coming from the north, not enemies, neighbors. Silas, the saloon keeper, was there on a mule, the blacksmith. 3 ranchers from the valley over, men who had looked at Anna with suspicion in town, men who would never invite her to tea, but men who knew the code of the West. "Get the buckets," Silas shouted. Jumping down, "Form a line." They did not speak to Anna. They did not smile. They simply grabbed shovels and sacks and joined the fight. Because out here, fire did not care about morals or rumors. Fire took everything, and if you let a neighbor burn, you might be next. They fought until sunset. By the time the wind died down, the fire was contained. The ranch was a scar upon the earth. The south pasture was black ash. The fence posts were glowing embers. But the barn stood. The cabin stood. The cattle, driven to the far north corner, were safe. Eli stood on the porch, leaning on his shovel. His face was a mask of soot, his eyes red-rimmed. He watched the neighbors ride away. They had offered no congratulations, just a nod of acknowledgement that the work was done. Anna came to him. She touched his arm. Her hand was blistered, wrapped in a rag. "We are still here," she whispered. "Yeah," Eli rasped. "We are." The reckoning came 2 days later. Sheriff Miller rode out to the ranch. He looked tired. He sat on his horse, looking at the blackened land, shaking his head. "Found something," Miller said, unbuckling his saddlebag. He pulled out a kerosene can. It was battered, scorched, but the stamp on the bottom was clear. It was a military-grade can, the kind sold only at the supply depot in the next county. "Found 3 of these along the South Ridge," Miller said. "And we found the man who bought them, a drifter named Pike. He got drunk in the saloon last night. Started bragging about how easy it is to burn out a squatter when you are being paid in gold." Eli walked to the fence. "Did he say who paid him?" "He did," Miller said. "After a night in the cell, he sang like a bird. Said Caro paid him $50 to light the match." Anna stood on the porch, listening. She held her breath. "I arrested Caro this morning," Miller said. "Found him packing his bags. He was planning to head for San Francisco. He is in the Iron Hotel now. Eli, the circuit judge is coming back next week. With the arson charge and the attempted fraud, he won't be seeing daylight for a long time." Miller looked at Anna. He tipped his hat. It was the first time he had shown her respect. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, "I reckon you can sleep easier tonight." When he rode away, the silence that settled over the ranch was different. The threat that had hung over them for months, the cloud of debt, the fear of the law, the shadow of Caro, was gone, dissipated like smoke in the wind. In the weeks that followed, the land began to heal. It was a slow, stubborn miracle. The autumn rains came, gentle and soaking. They washed the ash into the soil. Tiny shoots of green grass poked through the blackened earth, vivid and startling against the char. The mesquite bushes pushed out new leaves. Anna and Eli healed too. The burns on their hands turned to scars. The nightmares came less frequently. They spent their days repairing the fences, working side by side, their labor a shared language of ownership. One evening, Anna stood by the window, looking out at the recovering fields. She pressed a hand to her stomach. She had been feeling a strangeness in her body for weeks, a tenderness, a fatigue that was different from the tiredness of work. She had missed her bleeding twice. She knew what it meant. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at her heart. For years, her body had been a source of pain, a commodity to be used by others. The idea of pregnancy had always been a terror, a trap that would bind her forever to a man she hated. But then she looked at Eli. He was sitting by the fire, mending a bridle. He was humming a low, tuneless song. She walked to him. "Eli." He looked up, sensing the change in her tone. He set the bridle down. "What is it?" "I am with child," she said. The words hung in the air. Eli went perfectly still. He looked at her stomach, then at her face. He did not smile immediately. He did not cheer. He saw the shadow in her eyes. He stood up and took her hands. "Anna." He waited until she met his gaze. "Tell me how you feel. Does this feel like a trap? Tell me the truth." He was giving her the choice, even now. He was acknowledging that her body was hers, that her history made this complex. Anna looked at him. She thought of the baby growing inside her, a child made not in violence, but in the dark, quiet safety of the bed they shared, a child made of love. "No," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "It does not feel like a trap. It feels like a second chance. It feels like we won." Eli let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. A smile broke across his face, a real smile, one that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "A second chance," he murmured against her skin. "For both of us." They prepared for the baby with a quiet, joyful intensity. Eli built a cradle from the wood of a walnut tree that had survived the fire. He sanded it until it was smooth as silk, carving small stars into the headboard. Anna sewed tiny shirts from the softest flannel she could find in town. The town, slowly, began to thaw. It was not a sudden embrace, but a gradual erosion of prejudice. The scandal of the trial faded. Caro was gone. The image of Eli and Anna fighting the fire side by side had earned them a grudging respect. Women who had shunned Anna began to nod to her in the store. Mrs. Gable even stopped once to ask when the baby was due, offering a recipe for a tonic to help with morning sickness. It was a small bridge, but it was enough. They were no longer pariahs. They were just a family, trying to make a go of it in a hard land. The winter passed, softer than the one before, and when the spring wildflowers painted the hills in riots of yellow and blue, the baby came. It was a boy. They named him Samuel, after the brother lost to the snow. In the final scene, the sun was setting over the western horizon, painting the sky in streaks of violet and bruised gold. The air was cool and sweet, smelling of sage and damp earth. Anna sat in the rocking chair by the open door, the baby asleep in her arms. He was small, warm, and perfect. She looked down at his face, marveling at the miracle of him. She felt a fierce, terrifying love, a love that was entirely hers to give. Eli came up the steps of the porch. He had been out checking the herd, which was growing fat on the new grass. He took off his hat and hung it on the peg. He walked to her, his boots soft on the wood. He rested his large, scarred hand on her shoulder. Then, he reached down and touched the baby's head, his thumb brushing the soft fuzz of hair. They did not speak. They did not need to. In the silence, they shared a look that held everything. It held the memory of the dusty street where they met. It held the terror of the storm and the heat of the fire. It held the shame they had shed and the dignity they had reclaimed. Anna leaned her head back against his hip. She did not flinch. She settled into his strength, closing her eyes. Eli wrapped his arm around her and his son, pulling them close against him. He looked out at the land. It was still wild. It was still dangerous. There would be droughts, blizzards, and wolves, but it was no longer empty. He had done the unthinkable. He, a hard, solitary man of the West, had surrendered his pride. He had defied the town. He had risked his land. He had chosen to love a woman the world called ruined, and in doing so, He had found the only salvation that mattered. He had proved to her, and to himself, that the past did not own them. The sun dipped below the hills, leaving them in the soft, purple twilight. They stood together on the porch of the home they had built from the ashes, holding the future in their arms, ready for whatever the night might bring. Thank you for listening to the story of Anna and Eli. It has been a journey through the dust and the fire, and I hope their resilience has resonated with you. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below and share your location. If this story of the American West captured your imagination, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more tales of the frontier. And finally, I invite you to share your thoughts on the story in English. Tell me what you think the future holds for the Thorne family. Thank you for your time and your company.